The last couple philosophers we've looked at have tried to decide this question of whether abortion is morally right or wrong by trying to figure out whether fetuses are the sort of creatures that have the same sort of moral status as you and I. That is, whether they have moral rights like you and I do, or whether they're more like a stalk of celery or an apple, which is alive but yet doesn't have any moral rights. So we've seen that Donald Marquis argues, yeah, look, fetuses, they have this future like ours, and that gives them a right to life, whereas Marianne Warren argues, well, no, fetuses are not persons at all in the first place. They just are not the sort of creatures that have a right to life. So, what Warren does is take a look at the argument that's on the screen here, where somebody who wants to argue that abortion is morally wrong might say, well, look, persons have a right to life, and fetuses are persons. And since killing a person violates their right to life, therefore it's morally wrong to kill fetuses. Warren says, well, hey, this argument is valid, but it's not a sound argument because this second premise is false. Fetuses just are not persons in the first place, so they don't have a right to life. Well, Judith Jarvis Thomson comes along now, and she also wants to show that it's morally okay to have an abortion, but she's going to reply to this argument with a very different strategy. So, whereas Warren said, oh yeah, that second premise is false, Thomson says, well, look, let's at least for the sake of argument just assume that the second premise is true, that fetuses really are persons. What Thomson says instead is that it's this third premise which is false. She says that, yes, it's true. Let's assume that fetuses are persons. Let's assume that they have a right to life. But what Thomson claims is that even if you kill a fetus, in most circumstances, you're not actually violating their right to life. So, how does she make sense of that idea? Well, the first thing she needs to do is figure out, well, just what does it mean to have a right to life? So she considers a couple different answers to that question and dismisses a couple of them and then settles on what she thinks is the correct interpretation of what it is to have a right to life. So the first possible answer she considers is that having a right to life is just having a right to be given anything you need in order to survive. So if you and I have a right to life, that means that other people are doing something morally wrong if they don't give us everything that we require to continue living. And Thomson says, no, this can't be it. Because she says, look, I agree that you and I have a right to life, and yet she claims, look, we don't have a right to be given whatever it is we need to continue living. So she says, well, imagine that you're on your deathbed in a hospital, and it just turns out that the only possible thing that can save your life is Michael B. Jordan's cool hand on your fevered brow. Now, Thomson said, gosh, it sure would be nice if Michael B. Jordan, dropped everything, flew out to Grand Rapids to your hospital bed and put his cool hand on your fevered brow, since that's the one thing you need in order to survive. But she says, look, you do not have a right to Michael B. Jordan's cool hand on your fevered brow. He would not be doing something morally wrong if he said, you know what, I can't be flying around to hospitals all the time saving everybody. I've got other stuff to do. You couldn't say, hey, Michael B. Jordan, you're violating my right to life. You might say, gosh, it sure would have been nice if you had saved my life, but I guess, yeah, you're not really doing anything wrong if you decide not to. So Thomson concludes, look, just like we don't have a right for Michael B. Jordan to put his cool hand on our fevered brow if that's what we need to survive, our right to life must not be a right to be given whatever it is we need in order to survive. Okay, well then a second possibility is that a right to life is just a right not to be killed at all. When we say that I have a right to life and you have a right to life, we're just saying, well, that means that other people would be doing something morally wrong if they kill us in any context. But Thomson points out, well, that also doesn't seem to be true. There are lots of contexts in which it seems like it's morally permissible to kill someone else. It's even morally permissible to kill someone else who hasn't done something wrong themselves. So you could imagine a kind of out there scenario, but one in which perhaps some terrorist organization has strapped a suicide bomb vest on a 10-year-old child and told that child to walk into a building full of soldiers. You might say, gosh, in that context, you might think it's morally permissible for the soldiers to shoot that little kid and kill him before he's able to enter the building and kill himself and all of the soldiers inside. It's, of course, a terrible situation all around. Ideally, we'd want no one to be killed, but given the choice between killing the 10-year-old child and saving all of the soldiers versus all the soldiers dying and the 10-year-old child dying, well, it seems like in that scenario, it would be morally okay for the soldiers to shoot the child. So in that case, we'd say, look, the child still has a right to life, but it nonetheless would be morally okay to kill the child. So having a right to life must not be the same as having a right not to be killed, because it would be morally okay to kill the child in that scenario. So a right to life can't be a right to be given anything you need to survive. It can't be a right just not to be killed at all. So Thomson proposes, well, maybe it's just a right not to be killed unjustly. Or having a right to life is to say that, well, look, in most circumstances, it's morally wrong for other people to kill you unless there's some really good reason that justifies them killing you. And so then the question becomes, okay, we assume that the fetus is a person. We assume the fetus has a right to life. But now we need to ask, all right, so in what circumstances would it be unjust to kill that fetus? So we have to take a look at some different circumstances and ask in each scenario, well, is that a case in which killing the fetus would be unjustly killing them? So one scenario, the first scenario that Thomson considers, is that of the case in which a pregnancy, a fetus comes into existence as the result of rape. So in order to think through this case, she comes up with this analogy. And so she says, okay, so imagine that there's this famous violinist who is dying of a rare blood disorder, and the only way he can survive is if he is hooked up to your kidneys so that your kidneys can filter his blood. Now, the Society of Music Lovers just loves the violinist so much that they kind of do a naughty thing. They go and they, knock him out with chloroform so he doesn't know what's going on. So they knock him out, take him to a basement hospital somewhere. Then they go to your house, knock you out, and kidnap you. And then in this basement hospital, they hook the famous violinist up to your kidneys so that your kidneys are now filtering his blood. And this has all happened without the violinist's knowledge or consent and without your knowledge or consent. And then you wake up the next day and there's this doctor there, and the doctor says, "Ooh, sorry, didn't really know what the situation was here, but here's where we're at. You're hooked up to this violinist, and if you continue hooked up to him for 9 months, we'll be able to disconnect you, and he'll survive, and you'll probably survive, and everything will be great." Or you could disconnect from him, in which case the violinist will die. Now, Thomson says, okay, so in this scenario, we've got a scenario that's very analogous to one in which a woman is pregnant as the result of rape. In both cases, we have two innocent people who have had something done to them without their consent. You've been hooked up to the violinist without either of your consent. In the case of pregnancy, you've got a fetus that's been hooked up to a pregnant person without either of their consent. And now Thomson says, well, look, in this case, surely we can all agree it would be morally okay if you decided, look, man, I have other things to do. I cannot be hooked up to this guy for 9 months. Now, we might say, gosh, it would be really nice of you to, let this guy use your body for 9 months in order for him to survive. But Thomson imagines, look, most of us are going to say, of course, you would be well within your rights to say, no, sorry, I'm not going to stay hooked up to you. So it would, in this scenario, not be unjust to kill the violinist by you disconnecting from him. So analogously, she argues, look, it seems like if you become pregnant as a result of a rape, that's terrible for all kinds of reasons. But of course, you should have every right to decide, well, yes, I don't want to remain hooked up to this fetus, even though disconnecting from the fetus is going to result in the fetus dying. That's not going to violate the fetus's right to life, because even though I'll be killing the fetus, I will not be killing the fetus unjustly. All right, so at least in that case, in which a pregnancy is caused by rape, killing a fetus is not killing the fetus unjustly, so abortion should be morally permissible in that case. But what about a case in which, there's a pregnancy that a woman perhaps wanted to happen, tried to make happen, and yet that pregnancy now threatens her life. If she does not get an abortion, she will die. Well, we can consider the analogous case of the famous violinist. So suppose now this time instead that instead of being hooked up to the violinist against your will, without your consent, you actually volunteered and you say, oh man, I love the famous violinist too. I really want to save his life. So you volunteer to get hooked up to him for 9 months. And so they do that. And then a couple months in to you filtering his blood through your kidneys, the doctor comes up to you and says, oh boy, I'm so sorry, but a kind of unusual, unlikely thing has happened, and we're in the situation now where if you stay hooked up to the violinist, the toxins in his blood are going to overwhelm your body and you're going to die. The violinist might still be able to live, but you're going to die if you continue to keep him alive. Now, good news is we can disconnect you and save your life at this point, but if you disconnect, well, the violinist is going to die. Now, at this point, Thomson says, look, it seems like most people would say, gosh, no one would fault you if you decided to say, hey, I just value the famous violinist so much, I'm going to sacrifice my life for his. I'm totally cool with doing that. But she also assumes most of us would say, yeah, but if you decide, oh, I don't want to sacrifice my life for his, that is perfectly within your rights to do as well. That in this case, since your life is now being threatened, it's perfectly permissible for you to decide, oh yeah, I need to be unhooked from the violinist. And we can say, look, the violinist, yes, has a right to life, but that right to life doesn't consist in a right to have your life sacrificed for his. So in this case, it would be morally okay for you to kill the violinist because you're not killing him unjustly. Well, similarly, Thomson says, look, if you went out of your way to try and get pregnant, you get pregnant, but then your fetus is threatening your own life, then similarly, it would be morally permissible for you to decide, yes, I'm going to have an abortion, even though that means the fetus is going to die, because in this case, killing the fetus is not unjust because you're doing it to save your life. Okay, so then there's a third kind of scenario we can consider. Well, what if you had no intention of getting pregnant, but you just like having sex? And so you have sex and you use birth control, but as these things happen, sometimes, a condom breaks and accidentally you get pregnant. Well, would it be unjust to have an abortion and kill a fetus in that scenario? Well, so Thomson does another little thought experiment here, and she says, well, imagine that you own a house and you're living in your house, and further imagine that babies come into existence in a very different way in this imaginary world. And what happens is there's these little people seeds that just fly through the air willy-nilly outside. And if any of those little people seeds ever drift into somebody's house and settle in the carpet or on the couch, well, then they start developing into an embryo and eventually grow into a full-grown newborn person. So that's the state of the world. Now, you own this house, and you're like, I don't really want a little baby to take care of. So one thing you could do is just keep all of your windows and doors locked up and sealed up, and never go outside for fear that you'll let people seeds into the house. But Thomson says, look, that's ridiculously demanding. It would be absurd to say that you morally must shut up your house at all times. So, suppose, you like to feel the breeze every now and again. Open up your windows. So, what you do instead is you install some screens on your windows. You can open them up, let some air into the house. And that, these screens are pretty darn effective at keeping out people seeds, but every once in a while there's a manufacturing defect and they're broken. It lets a people seed in. And suppose that happens to you. A little people seed sneaks through one of the screens, lands on your couch, and now you've got a fetus growing on your couch in your house. And Thomson asks, okay, so now let's assume that fetus growing on your couch has a right to life. Does that right to life give it a right to stay in your house? And she says, well, come on, no, of course it doesn't. It's your house, for goodness sake. So you can decide, well, I don't want a fetus growing on my couch, so I am going to, take it off of my couch, even though that means the fetus is going to die. So in that case, she argues, of course, it's morally okay to kill the fetus because you're not doing so unjustly. And you can see the analogy with pregnancy by the same token. Like, look, if you're enjoying having sex and using birth control, but that birth control happens to fail, lets a little, people seed, sperm in, fertilizes an ovum, then you've got a fetus growing inside your body. Well, that fetus has a right to life, we can assume, but that right to life doesn't mean it has a right to use your body. You can decide, well, look, it's my body. I don't want this growing in me. And so it's perfectly permissible and just for you to take that fetus out of your body, even though that means the fetus is going to die. So at least in all of these cases, Thomson thinks it's perfectly morally permissible to have an abortion, to kill a fetus, even if we assume that fetus has a right to life. So Thomson winds up with an argument that looks something like this. So she says, look, we can agree that persons have a right to life, and we can agree that fetuses are persons. Let's just assume that for the sake of argument. But then she points out, look, the only way you violate a person's right to life is by unjustly killing them. But then she's just showing that in most cases, actually having an abortion does not unjustly kill a fetus. Now, maybe there are some incidences in which it is morally wrong to kill a fetus, but in the vast majority of cases, like the ones we just considered, it's not unjust to kill a fetus. So it does not violate their right to life. So therefore, in most cases, it's morally okay to have an abortion. And that's Thomson's argument in a nutshell.